Prescott, Niles from the Knack. It's a pleasure to talk to you after decades. As I told you, it's been 43 years since our last interview.
Hello. Who knew?
All the hype was still happening at that point. I mean, we were told that we were going to interview the new Beatles. How did you feel about that?
Well, we'll get into that. We'll get into that because that's a very interesting discussion, by the way. But anyway, here we be. This is why one of the reasons we're here, besides catching up with the Knack history. So this album was recorded, as we know, in House of Blues in 2001 for our last studio album called Normal as the Next Guy. And boy, that applies to today, doesn't it?
Normal as the Next Guy. I was going to mention this later, but I'll mention it now. One of the lines in Normal as the Next Guy is normal as Chris Rock.
Yes. Well, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? Well, I'm going to have my sons come out there and slap me in a couple of minutes. Is that okay? We'll be in fashion, if you know what I mean.
Anywho, moving right along.
Yeah, I know.
Live at the House of Blues. Let's get into that. 2001, in 25 September 2001, which was 2 weeks after September 11. What was the vibe in the room?
The vibe in the room, if we had been in New York and had done it, I'm sure it would have been a very different atmosphere, the heaviness of it. In Los Angeles, in a way, we were removed from it. The shock was still here, but people coming to the show that night okay, I make a comparison to today's world. The audience at that particular time were exuberant to come see us play. After playing live shows during the lockdown, where there's a different type of heaviness because of, this is it's a pandemic versus a shockdemic, if you know what I'm saying, with the towers coming down. So compared to today, that was an exuberant crowd, even after a tragedy.
Well, you mixed two of my favorite things into one on this record at that show, Tequila and The Doors.
Break On Through and Tequila, we were jamming one day at rehearsal, and Burden is a great slide guitarist. And one of the songs on the second album, End of the Game, you can really hear how brilliant he is, besides being brilliant anyway. I mean, Burden gave me $20 to talk about him. No, he's one of my favorites, and I think underappreciated in terms of what he played solo-wise and arrangements. So we were jamming on Tequila one day, and Doug was a big Doors fan, and somehow we came in and we started doing Break On Through, same chord changes. And that became what it was. We had been, periodically we've done that combination over the years. So I'm glad it's on the record. And again, the solo is fantastic,
But you also had an association with Ray Manzarek at times in your career too.
Yeah, back in the early days, when we played Troubadour and Starwood and all the local LA clubs, we were lucky enough to have musicians come and jam with us. And Ray Manzarek later on in our beginning, I'll get back to some of the other people, but we were a big Doors fan, and Ray Manzarek had known Bruce Gary, our drummer, and we did Love Me Two Times, we did Break On Through, we did Soul Kitchen, and we did Whiskey Bar to close the set.
Well, My Sharona was played at discos in the late 70s, early 80s. That would fit alongside Hot Stuff by Donna Summer.
I used to roller skate to that song. In LA, they started having they opened these, people would dance and one of the best memories is seeing Jack Nicholson dance, roller skating and singing Sharona along with it. It was a club in the Valley, 1979, where, remember roller skating, I don't know what it was like in Australia, but it became this craze, and it was wonderful to have, that as well as Donna Summer and even Miss You by the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah. A disco song they did, which is pretty cool. So it's a good movement. So there's a lot of energy is what I'm trying to say that we rode the wave on. And luckily we had the good song or the vehicle. And by the way, what I really, there was two versions of the song. When we originally recorded the album, Mike Chapman's the only one that figured we had a hit single. He said Sharona would be in #1. Mike had experiences, with Blondie, all the English groups, Slade, Susie Quattro. And, I was living in England and had no idea in that time period, 73 to 75, that Michael Chapman and Nicky Chin has partnered with this incredible songwriting team. So when he started working with Mike, he felt that that song definitely would be the hit. We were touring Europe at the time, and Capitol did not release a single. They released the album to radio, which was kind of different in a way. I think some record companies would want to go with one song to break the ice, maybe, which would have been Good Girls Don't, and save Sharona to follow up. The album was given to radio, and Sharona became the most requested song in America. So therefore, they had to do a rush release of the single My Sharona. And unfortunately, the brilliant guitar solo, which made the 5.5 minute song, was cut in half. And when we did Countdown in Australia, again, we were playing pretty much to the edited version, which was still an honor, but nevertheless, that's a great solo. And I always felt in a way that kind of took that away,
Yeah, and that whole song was driven by that bass. Did you create that intro?
Well, it was a riff Burton had. I played it my style. The drum arrangement is unique because he's not just, I have recordings when we were playing around LA, and maybe Bruce was playing like a hi-hat at first, but that flam groove is one of the most unique drum parts, actually. Bass line is, you could say it's a little bit of Give Me Some Lovin', but backwards in a way, if you know what I mean, right? But it's the way maybe I played it. But Bruce's drum part and the way the song progresses is marvelous. And I always give Bruce a lot of credit for the next rhythm section and also being such a fabulous live drummer. And again, if you saw us back then, you know what I'm saying. Yeah. And I miss Bruce, and of course I miss Doug very much as I'm doing this, Did the record company oversell this band right at the very start? Like I'd said to you earlier, when I went to talk to you in 1979, I was sold on the fact that, I was going up to talk to the new Beatles. How do you feel personally with the association with the Beatles? It's funny, I was told to avoid bringing it up, but it's inevitable. I mean, Randy, I kid him around. I saw him an article the other day that came out, which did the same thing. So may I set the record straight?
Please.
You want to swear me in? Capitol, well, first of all, we started out playing LA clubs. We're making 100 a night for 2 shows. No favors, no backers, nothing. We just played very hard. When we got record interest, after those Tom Petty or Springsteen play with us, some record companies go, wow, these guys might be cool, And by the way, some of the material on the album and Sharona was not written before we started playing. I think the band had an identity as a result, and we replaced some of the earlier songs with new songs. Let Me Out, Number Your Name, Otara, Sharona, Selfish. So a lot of those album songs really came from performing live, which is, I think, a real, shows you how a band sometimes can get together and really get their own sound. And I think that had a lot to do with it. So Capitol Records had Bruce Raven was one of the talent scouts for the label back then. And what he did was he started to inviting like people that worked in the mailroom, secretaries, people that worked in the Capitol building. So when after a while, we pretty well got a lot of the people coming down. They liked the band. And it was a brilliant way to get the company involved with us. Polygram offered us $1 million to sign. So did other record labels. But as you know, if you take $1 million up front, you're going to owe $1 million. We didn't even know what that meant. But of course, we loved the Beatles, and Doug was a huge Beatles fan. But Capitol Records were one of the other record labels that were interested. They never made us, guys, come on, we got to talk to you. We're going to make you into this. It was never about that. What they saw live is why they signed us. So when I do interviews back then and they're going, well, so Capitol Records, made you guys, going, well, they signed us, but that's pretty much all they did. And when there was promo for the album release, by the way, leading up to Billboard and Cashbox, all they did was have the back of the album cover with us not in the picture. So they're coming, they're coming, they're coming. There was no Beatle. we didn't know. They didn't know if we'd sell 10 albums. How would they know that? Radio made us. Capitol Records didn't pay the DJs off because they didn't know what single to promote. So I'm giving you, it's like, it's too simple to believe, but it was really that organic. The album cover, somebody asked me this the other day, and I go, no, it's not Meet the Beatles. We're not shaded. Robert Freeman did. A good friend of mine, Randy St. Nicholas, who at the time was married to Nick St. Nicholas of Steppenwolf, was an artist, and she wanted to get into photography, and I was friends with her, and she shot the album cover. And it was her idea. She didn't look at Meet the Beatles. It was just a band shot. And it was kind of goofy too, because Bruce is laughing and everybody's, Doug's got that sneer. Lennon didn't sneer, So the album cover is what came up. That was just a shot that looked kind of cool and had character. The back cover was us in like a TV show, right? How it looked, or a soundstage, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, that was Doug's idea. Remember Something New by the Beatles? It came out in the US. It had a shot of them, the album cover, like with cameras and on a stage. So if anything was resembling that, it would be that, the back cover. But nobody got, and I'm playing a Marshall, I'm not playing a box. So that started the thing when we started to go up the charts. I think that the labels started coming on us because we sold more records, became number one quicker, except for the Beatles, and the Beatles were on Capitol. So that started it. Now, the time we got to Australia, I didn't know that a lot of the press were chanting that slogan, honestly. And when we got to New Zealand, I remember a poster that had the biggest thing to hit New Zealand ever. I'm going, no, we're not, we didn't tip the island over, it's just, and mentioning Australia, we played all the clubs, we played Melbourne, the Bombay Club, of course, right? And we played Sydney, and, we played 4 cities, right?
I have all of these cities right there. Look at that.
What do I miss? Sydney. Newcastle, yes. Yeah, I got it. Boy, you're good. Yeah. I love that tour. And it was, Australia was wonderful. I love Sydney because it was a lot like California. And we stayed at the Steeple Townhouse, I believe. Is that correct?
The Steeple Townhouse in Sydney, which is where we originally met.
And I remember checking into the hotel and our picture's there. And underneath is Jim Neighbors from Go Pow. And I met him in the elevator going up there. And I go, hey, Gomer. Anyway, but it was a great time. And then we went to Japan afterwards. Yeah. So it was wonderful to be there. And, a lot of people didn't know us then. It wasn't like people came to our shows and fainted or anything. They were just love the music. And that's all it was, really.
Yeah, you're on tour in Australia with 2 great Australian bands that were really just starting out at the same time then. Both artists still around, James Rain with Australian Crawl and Ross Wilson with Mondo Rock. Ross last night, and just he remembers fondly. Ross Wilson says hello, by the way. You worked with Ross on the very first show in Australia. Where's that date? I had it around here somewhere. The Doncaster one, I think he said he played with you. There you go. August 17, 1979, Doncaster in Melbourne, was with both Australian Crawl and Mondo Rock. Do you actually remember those bands?
I had some memory. I don't even remember us playing that night. So I probably remember probably some of it, not directly or indirectly.
You should mention too, because we're talking about the Beatles, the George Harrison association that you have.
Yeah.
Like you were jamming with George. So, as talking about, the Beatle comparisons, was George aware of the Beatle comparisons with the Knack when you met him?
Well, first, luckily, I had met George. I lived in England from 1973 to 75. And I met George, like, how you doing? I met Ronnie Wood at the time. I met Keith, who actually had a gun in his holster that night in the club. And so I met a lot of people. So, years later in '86, I was at home and, Knack was well known and everything. I got a call from this producer, told me there was a session going on and he couldn't tell me who it was. And I had no idea. So I went down there and I walked in, there's George Harrison, right? Now, if I hadn't met George Harrison, I might have had some serious heart fluctuation problems, But I went up to him, I was introduced, and I said, "Hey, George, how you doing?" And I go, "I don't know if you remember, but, I met you back in the day. Derek Taylor met this girl, Kathy." He goes, "Oh, yeah, he knew Kathy." He goes, "Yeah." I said, "So cool." He goes, "But now, he said, "You were the Knack, right?" He goes, "Yeah, I like your stuff." That is all I needed to know. I crossed over from a sycophant, really, even though not, and I was kind of, because when I met him then, I was just whoever I was. And I always wanted to be known for being a musician, not just being a hanger, So that was wonderful. And cutting in this control room with George was great because he'd be fooling around. And he did "I Feel Fine," like a few bars and laughed or something. Jim Keltner was drumming, which was a real honor to play with Jim, who was one of Bruce Garry's heroes, by the way. And Lawrence Struber played guitar, who had played with Paul McCartney, as you know. And it was a wonderful session. Now, so I'm doing with George. I've got a chart of what I'm playing. George has very complicated chord changes, not your usual. So I'm concentrating on that. Jim Keltner is a very laid back drummer. Bruce Garry used to push all the time. And I'm thinking, I better not screw up here. Now, I had a hit album, right? And I'm worried about screwing up. So if that makes any sense to you, I don't think you ever get to the point where I'm a big shot, man. I can play with anybody. And I was lucky enough to pull it off and add some of my own parts to it. So that was for the movie Shanghai Surprise, by the way. That version I did became the trailer for the movie. It's called Someplace Else Was a Song. George went back to England. I worked 2 days with him. He went back to England. And I was told from the producer who went there that I'd probably go over and do some more tracks. Unfortunately, or actually more fortunately for George, he met Jeff Lynne, who was a neighbor down the road a piece. And they did George's best album. And they recut Someplace Else. And that album's amazing, right? All those years ago, only Jeff Lynne could have produced it like that. Oh, so yeah. I never got to meet George again, but it was a great memory for a couple of days anyway,
Two things we have to listen to. Live at the House of Blues sure. is the Knack live album, but we also need to discover your sons and daughters' band, Gateway Drugs. Tell me about them. They had their own band. They wrote their own songs and their albums. They did 2 albums. First one's Magic Spell. Second is called Public Service, PSA, Public Service Announcement. This is pre-pandemic, by the way. And I think they had their own writing style and they all sung lead and they played their own instruments. My daughter was a pretty cool bass player, as it turned out, and guitarist. And unfortunately, the pandemic hit and the second album never got a chance to get off the ground. Have you ever got up and played with them? No. When they play, they do their own thing. I'm the roadie, though. I have the real pleasure of setting up, breaking down, and using some of my gear, by the way. You see that bass? Yeah. By the way, that's the Knack bass. Is that the one that My Sharona was played on? Yeah, it's on the first album. I used it pretty much. It's the first album, second album, Well, I guess I can hold it like this. It's a guild. And this became, Mike Chapman loved this bass. So this became the base of the Knack for, even though I use other ones occasionally, but the first 2 albums, I mainly use this one. And sometimes my daughter will play it or my son will play it, which is cool, and there's a good story behind this. I don't know if you want to hear it. But... So tell me the story of the bass. Well, when I came back from England in '75, I started playing with different bands, and I was playing a club in downtown LA near Watts. It's more like a rhythm and blues thing I was playing at the time. I was a big Graham Central Station fan at the time because I by the way, Sly, when I first saw Sly play, it was with Jimi Hendrix at the Fillmore.
And can you imagine? Sly was one of my favorite bands, and Larry Graham was another influence on my bass playing later on. And so after I played my first set, the club owner, he said, you play bass? I go, yeah. And he said, I want to show you something. He took me in his office and he took out that bass. And I go, that's cool. He goes, you want to buy it? And I go, I don't know. Is it hot? You know, like stolen. He grabbed me and going, you want to buy it or you want to die? Okay. So he says, okay. So I made $100 for the night, and that's where I spent my $100. So that bass, I love Jack Bruce, by the way, and that bass can kind of get, you know, if I crank it up, can sound a little like Cream. You know what I mean? I love it. Jack was a major influence on me too. So anyway, when I started, I had an old P bass, by the way, and a Gibson bass. When Mike Chapman saw it, he loved that bass, and he said, Prescott, and I played that live as well a lot. But he said, that's the bass you should play. So thank you, Mike. So that became the sound. Wow. That's the story of the bass. And I wouldn't have had it if I didn't, you know, fork it. Then my lights would have been on another week probably.
Thank you for your time.
Okay. I want to thank you for hanging in there, and we'll be seeing you soon, maybe, huh?
Thanks, Prescott.
Bye.
See ya.